And it's so important, y'all, for families to get good news. They need good news. Even if their student is the student that makes you think that this might be your last year in the classroom, they still need good news. And you will go so much further if you pepper that in. Hi there, and welcome to That's Just Good Teaching with me, Deanna Smith, where we talk about practical and easy to implement culture responsive and ABAR practices that are actually just good teaching. Today, we're going to be talking about strategies that will help you completely transform the way you communicate between school and home. I know that for a lot of teachers, it can be really difficult to figure out when and how to really make those school to home connections strong, but we know that that is what can really move the needle for our students. When the connection is strong between home and school, kids know that all of the adults in their life and all of the caregivers are on the same team, and we can work together to ensure that our students are successful. So without further ado, let's get into it. But before we get too far, Bestie, have you picked up your copy of Rooted in Joy yet? This book is going to be your how-to guide for all things classroom culture, and it is written by yours truly. A lot of the things that we're talking about today are going to actually be in this book, and I elaborate even further. If you have already picked up your copy and you're loving it, please make sure you leave a review and let me know in the comments if you got your copy or not. And if you haven't picked up your copy, like I said, it is available now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and bookstores. So make sure you check out Rooted in Joy for even more information about totally transforming your classroom culture and creating that classroom culture of joy and inclusion we're all working towards. All right, y'all, so let's get into it. The first tip that I have for you today is to just be visible. What does that look like? Well, I know that our teachers are more burnt out than ever and there's a lot going on, but being visible can be a huge step for you in just creating and building that rapport with the families that are at your school and the parent or caregiver community. This is something that you should especially think about if you're in your early years of teaching, or if you are like new to a school or you're in a new teaching environment, because it's kind of a big ask to entrust your child, your baby, to other adults every single day. And families really don't know what's going on in the classroom. And so it's really critical for you to build those connections of trust. And an easy way is just being visible. What does that look like? Well, I would recommend thinking about how many times a week you can be there in the drop off or in the pickup lane if that's not already part of your duties. Just making sure that, families can put a name to the face. They see you, they've talked to you. And it might be a lot at first, to think, okay, am I going to be out there every single day? And not necessarily. So for me, I always knew that I wanted to be out there on Mondays and Fridays in the morning and in the afternoon so that, I could just kind of like set the tone for the week on Monday and then really leave on a high note and a positive note on Friday. So those are my 2 days that I made sure that I was available in the car lane. But that also means being available at those school events. If you're at a high school, maybe thinking about going to a few games or going to other events that happen like fundraisers. If you're in the K-8 setting, sometimes there'll be sales in the morning or different little fun activities or family nights. And I know sometimes teachers are required to be at those and sometimes they're not, but even if you're not required, just being visible, being seen so that they can see you, they know that you're involved, you're invested, can go a long way for building connections with families. And like I said, of course, we want to honor your boundaries. And I know that folks are worried about burnout. So just set a reasonable expectation that works for you and set that intention and just put it in your calendar. So it's like if you're, if you know maybe that you're really exhausted towards the end of the week, maybe it's not on Friday. Maybe your day is Wednesday and that's kind of like your little midweek energizer. Or maybe if your school has 4 events over the course of the year, you commit to going to 2. But you will see over time when families know you and they're familiar with you, you will see that the level of trust that they have in you grows, and just the understanding and the benefit of the doubt that they're going to give you is going to increase. Because sometimes when it comes to situations with there's a disagreement, between what happened between 2 students, or a student is not being totally honest about what's going on in the classroom. When the family knows the teacher, they give them the benefit of the doubt, and building that visibility is going to help with that. So just make it a goal of yours to be as visible as possible. It doesn't have to be for long. You can make a high impact by just going around, saying hi to everybody for 5 minutes, and then going about your day. But it will go far when it comes to building trust between you and the families. All right, ready for the next tip? Okay, so the second thing that my friends out there can do to really increase the bond and the connection between school and home is to find some sort of weekly communication, whether that's a weekly newsletter. For me personally, I did a weekly newsletter and I absolutely loved it. The reason why I like doing a newsletter was because there are like all of the apps and stuff, but I like to have something that was more long form because it had a lot of information. Now, did every caregiver read that? Absolutely not. Probably maybe half. I don't even know. I didn't look at the data of how many were actually reading it, but it was something that was always great for me to point to and say, hey, it's in the newsletter, announcements are in the newsletter. And so what would I include in that newsletter? Well, it wouldn't just be a newsletter about like, you know, this is what's going on in the classroom. It would have pictures. It would have home to school connection ideas. So I remember I would always talk about, especially this time of year, talk about ways that they can incorporate fractions, like with baking and holiday baking and that kind of thing. So there's all these kinds of little bits and tidbits that you can put in there. I would talk about what we were doing in the curriculum. And I know not every single family has the time to really, go out and invest and spend all of this time working on, what you're doing in school. Let's be reasonable. But for some families that do, they want to know how they can bring the learning home. I would put in book recommendations and then pictures. They love to see pictures. They love to see their kids in the centers, at the kidney table, on the carpet, singing the song. Like, you could never go wrong with having pictures. So if you have a virtual newsletter that was like on an email list that I did, I included a ton of pictures, and that really went a long way. So I recommend having some sort of cadence that you establish, whether it is a weekly newsletter, a monthly newsletter, or even just to get started, a quarterly newsletter or a newsletter that you're sending out before each long break. That way families can just see a little bit about what's going on in the classroom. And it's fun for you too, because then you can also kind of have an ongoing, chronicle archive of what you've been doing as well, which is kind of fun to look back. I know for me, I still have the copies, if you guys can believe this. I still have the copies of the letters that I used to do when I first year teaching, when I was a fifth grade teacher. And I like to go back and look at them because it's like, oh, that's what I was doing with my kids. So think about how you can incorporate a newsletter, whether it's an email newsletter or it's a newsletter that you're putting out on like a Parent Square app or something, or it's a physical paper newsletter. That can be a really great way to really bridge that connection between school and home. All right, tip number 3 coming up. All right, y'all. So the third thing that you can do to strengthen the connection between school and home is to utilize technology. Oh my gosh, there are so many apps, programs, automations out there for like family communication. It's crazy. There is Parent Square. That's one that I used. I also use School Reach. And then I also, back in the day, was a huge Class Dojo person. I was like a Class Dojo ambassador. I was all over that Class Dojo. So think about what it looks like to incorporate and use these different apps in a really meaningful way. So I'll give you an example. My friend's daughter, she is in middle school, right? And they have a system where you get text alerts. And mind you, is it annoying sometimes? Absolutely. Do you need to be annoying sometimes? Absolutely. Don't be worried about kind of spamming families and stuff, because honestly, they're probably not going to read every single thing. So if you send out 10 things, maybe they'll read 5. So don't be afraid about annoying them. And if you're a parent watching this and you're like, oh my gosh, tell them to stop texting me. That's just how we got to get the information out. We got to bug you. You're getting a lot of notifications and we got to work our way in there. So utilizing those apps. So my friend's daughter, like I was saying, she gets a text every time there's a test, every time the grades are updated on the app. They use Schoology, but if you were using like Blackboard or Canvas or whatever you're using, right? They get updates every time there is a grade, updates every time there's a test, what's going on in class, all of these things. And it's an actual test. And then they get reminders of the fun stuff too. So they get reminders, well, it's like tomorrow is pajama day, or, next week is the fall fest, whatever it is. But she gets text messages, and it's so helpful because that's already on her phone. You know she's on her phone already. Or if they're on the Class Dojo, they're using the apps and messages. Anything you can do to automate, to get it out there. You can set it up at the beginning of the year if you know the dates, and then it just goes out when it's time. You can schedule it, and then it just goes out and you're done. So whether you're using like a Dean's List, like I said, Parent Square, School Reach, ClassLink, there's so many, but just look into the scheduling capabilities and don't be afraid to kind of like spam people and send them all the information. In this case, we go up against technology every day, y'all. We're fighting against technology with our students because our students are using technology inappropriately or they're spending too much time in technology. But this way, technology can actually help us. So let's utilize it for something positive and use it to bring that communication in. And of course, technology is never going to replace face-to-face time. And that's why I talked about being visible as the first tip, because you do want to still have that face-to-face contact, but you can get a lot of the little tiny questions knocked out by just utilizing technology. So that is my third tip. And even if your school doesn't use something, you can still use something in your individual classroom as well, just to implement for yourself. And then maybe your school will catch on. All right, tip number 4. All right, y'all, and tip number 4, the last tip for bridging those connections between home and school is to diversify what you're communicating about. What do I mean here? Well, one thing that I see teachers doing is that there is a theme with everything that they send home, and the theme is what the kids are not doing. Now, granted, listen to me when I say, I know that there's probably a lot of things that the kids aren't doing that you need to communicate. And I know that you probably have students where you could send home something every day talking about the ways that they did not reach expectations, whether it's behaviorally or academically. But also, from a family perspective, from a parent caregiver perspective, you don't want to open your phone or open your email or come to school and every day it's bad news. You just don't. I mean, it doesn't feel good. It's not exciting. It's kind of demoralizing. And then you get to the point where it's like, you start to get suspicious of the teacher because you're like, well, if all this is going wrong, then what are you doing? And I know some of you have been on the other side of that before, where like it's the student and the family member, the caregiver kind of like flip it and team up on you a little bit. And you're like, wait, no, you're making the classroom unsafe. So I don't want that for you. I've been in that situation and it sucks. So I don't want that for you. So make sure you're diversifying what you are communicating, okay? Even if this student, I don't care if they had 4 bad days, if they have 1 good hour, I will be on that app. So-and-so had a great hour today. And I mean, it's kind of, you might feel kind of silly because you're like, okay, it's 1 good hour, but maybe they were having these behaviors before. But it's so important, y'all, for families to get good news. They need good news. Even if their student is the student that makes you think that this might be your last year in the classroom, they still need good news. And you will go so much further if you pepper that in. If you diversify what you're sending home, and make sure it's not just about behavior. Some teachers, because the thing that is most kind of on top for us at the end of the day is how the day went behaviorally. You're forgetting to share academic success, academic growth, what's going on, funny moments, candid, silly little pictures, or funny little things that happen. I mean, don't get so bogged down in just talking about student behavior that you forget that there's a lot of other things that our kids have going on inside the classroom. So that is really my last tip, and it's probably the most important, is that you want to make sure that you're diversifying and sending home a large variety of information. And if you have the wherewithal to do it, I know some of you are going to be like, Deanna, I'm doing my best, girl. I'm doing my best. I'm treading water. I understand. But if you have the wherewithal to do it, another thing that I would do is send home resources. So for like Latino heritage, for example, we had stuff that we were doing in classroom, but then I would send home resources of here's stuff that you could do at home. Or, this local nonprofit is having like a holiday fair for, fall or Halloween. And I would send that home too. So just be creative and be inventive and imaginative about what you can send home. And remember that, for every instance of behavior you send, try to send something else. Try to send something that's positive or a win or something like that, because on the receiving side, it can be a lot. It can be very demoralizing to get bad news. And that doesn't minimize that it's also hard to manage a classroom when you have students that aren't cooperating. So I don't want to minimize that struggle either. But just diversify what you're doing and just take an audit, look back through your most recent communication with the family and ask yourself, like, am I sharing a variety of things, or am I only calling them when things go wrong? So that is my last tip, is just to diversify what you are sharing with families. All right, y'all. So that was 4 strategies that can totally transform the way that you manage your family communication. Like I said in the intro, if you want to learn more, Rooted in Joy, it's here for you. I go into detail on all of these strategies and more in chapters 4 and 5, where we talk about applying everything that we learned in the book. So make sure you check that out if you haven't already. If you are not already part of our little community on Instagram, make sure you're following me over there at Deanna Smith. And I am thrilled to be doing this work with y'all. Let me know in the comments what topics you would like covered next. I am so enjoying these, I feel like it's like a little mini lesson, right? A little mini lesson on teaching, and I'm really enjoying doing these with you because this is my passion, teaching. So make sure you leave me a comment saying what you would want to learn about next, and tell me, how is family communication going with you? How's it going? And if you try to implement any of these strategies, be sure to let me know how it's going. Send me a DM with any questions you might have. And thank you so much for joining us again today on That's Just Good Teaching. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share with all of your teacher friends. I'll see you in the next one.